We are being recorded and we're about to go live onto the internet.
Ooh.
And we are streaming live on the internet on twitch.television. Welcome everyone to the second online Anyone's Game 2021. My name is Rick Dakin, and I am a faculty member in the creative writing program at the Ringling College of Art and Design. And I am joined this week by our two esteemed guests. To my left, maybe your right, is Omari Akil, one of the founders and a proprietor of Board Game Brothers and a designer of games like Rap Gods and the upcoming Hoop Gods. He's also the current president of the Indie Game Developers Network. Welcome, Omari.
Hey, thanks, Rick.
And to my right, your left, maybe, is Jeeyon Shim, a game designer and outdoor educator based in California. Her works ground itself in ideas of community and stewardship of the natural world and has been featured on Polygon, Shut Up and Sit Down, and Dicebreaker. I'm told she likes dirt and green growing things. Welcome, Jeeyon.
Hi, nice to be here.
Is there anything else you want to, I left out that you want to share with the folks out there before we get going?
I have a Kickstarter in about a week and a half. It's called The Shape of Shadows, and it's a connected path game about a magician's assistant who discovers that something's gone horribly wrong and has to rise to the occasion. And I'm really excited to get that started. I almost said get it kicked off, but didn't want to. A little much.
And Omari, you just had a pretty successful Kickstarter for Hoop Gods not too long ago, right?
Yeah, that was right at the end of last year, and we're moving forward on that. And it's been a slow process this time, I think, for a lot of reasons. But we're looking forward to some more really cool stuff coming out of that soon. Most prominently, I think something I'm proud of is I think we have a solo mode for that game that is actually working. So I was scared of going down that road, but I think it's okay. I think it's gonna be good.
All right. Well, maybe you can keep some of those hard-earned solo design thoughts, how we might apply them to our challenge from last week. So to remind you and the viewers at home, what we're doing here is a kind of relay race game slow jam. So last week our topic was ideation and design, and we challenged our two guests, Sarah Doom and Ken Hite, to come up with an original game design based around a theme, which was revealed to them, which was created by students in my advanced writing for games class, which was second chances. So second chances was the theme, and I know some of those students and hopefully some others out there are also taking their own design stabs at games around second chances. But Ken and Sarah, being Ken and Sarah, came up with something pretty cool and kind of creepy. And so we have a working title for it, which you're free to change, but we need to call it something. And so the working title is Angel's Grave. And they talked through this whole process, and this is basically where we got. And this is a generational dungeon, and using dungeon almost as a placeholder. It doesn't have to be literally a Dungeons and Dragons style dungeon, but a tomb, a space, something that you explore. And it's the players encounter it in 3 different time periods. And just maybe there's an angel buried at the bottom of it. So the first encounter with the dungeon is like in a fantasy medieval kind of classic D&D style thing, although towards the end they sort of thought it would be better if it was set in a specific place on Earth, so not necessarily Forgotten Realms. So the second era would be in the sort of Victorian era, and then the third era would be a modern day, and the people would be like urban explorers who would probably be like doing it for Instagram and live streaming it and filming each other going through it. And the goal of this, right? So that's sort of the framework, but the goal of the game is to model self-exploration and change through the exploration of this space, right? So they threw out some examples of maybe you'd get cards or items that you found that could be useful for in one way, but end up in a museum later. And this idea of sort of accumulating and deaccumulating things, both physical things, but also personality traits. And that was a big part that they talked about how this would change your personality, right? And coming up with some mechanic for that. The idea was that the responses, your characters that you're going to play or your role you're going to take on in each of those three things are in dialogue with each other, whether your ancestors literally or sort of disciples or followers, or you could be rebelling against this legacy of yours. But that the dungeon environment itself would be relatively static, and you would re-encounter areas in this new frame, right? Of like from the different eras with different abilities, different equipment, different goals, different perspectives. But they did think, get on that legacy bandwagon. They thought there should be some sort of fun legacy element to it, right? That the changes that the players may carry forward from one era to the other. And one thing they both emphasized was like death should play a role and should be like fun, in the sense of like players shouldn't be afraid to die, because that then offers them a new play ability and maybe changes the game in some interesting way. Maybe they become wights or some denizens of the dungeon. They didn't want I wrote characters in this document, the players scared of dying, right? And that those could manifest themselves different in each era. And so the whole theme, everything it boils down to is that the dungeon, the space, is a reflection of the characters, the player characters, and their sort of mental, moral, spiritual state. And so it's a way to explore these ideas of identity, inheritance, or, for good or ill, and sort of change, mutation, adaptation. So that's what they threw you guys. I have some more notes I can go through if you have any questions, but really it's your ball now, so you can play with it. What would be your next steps then with having bought into this idea?
I have some thoughts right off the bat, but Omari, if you want to go first, I'd love to cede the floor to you.
I can say what's interesting. I think I do have some thoughts. I think my process, because I'm more focused on the board game side of things, it usually just involves taking ideas and very quickly trying to translate them into something that resembles mechanics. It's kind of I think, slower process sometimes to go that direction, but I do like to kind of start there. And so very quickly I just started thinking of, based on some of the things you were describing, especially ideas like death, like what does that look like in terms of a mechanic, and how do you keep players engaged potentially who have just died? So I'm thinking through that a little bit more. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I have a kind of a scattershot approach to design, and depending on the nature of the project, that often determines my first steps. So the first thing I would determine is, what scale do I want this game to be on? Do I want it to be a small experimental game that could potentially become a bigger project later? Do I want it to basically stay on my Patreon? Or do I want it to be a game that I plan to kickstart or publish in a more like large scale, like multi-month project management way? So once I determine that will actually narrow down the logistics, because I tend to start with concept and logistics like very hand in hand at the beginning. And this is sort of a unique case because I'm not coming up with the idea originally. And the very first thing that I caught, my logistical framework caught on, is actually these 3 time frames. I would probably just choose one. And of the 3, I would probably go not with fantasy / medieval, but just fantasy. And there's a few reasons for that. The first is that both Victorian and modern archaeology require research, and research for me is a much bigger time investment. Like if I'm researching something that could take months. not only that, but because Victorian is in there and also archaeology is in there, there's also the added research of how to write something that is not inherently colonialist or upholding kind of white settler colonialism or values of imperialism thoughtlessly in a narrative way, which tends to happen, you know, fairly frequently in Western art and media. And also from a design perspective, I just don't find it as interesting. If I'm going to be researching something like a lot and putting that time investment into it, I want it to be something that I feel like I'm not working against a negative headwind, if that makes sense. And that's why I would probably hone in on the fantasy, but then how to keep the original spirit of the game of like, you want there to be 3 distinct time periods that the player goes through. And that over those time periods, they feel their internal and external play experience evolve in direct relation to external factors, in this case, the passage of time. And I think for me, one of the first prototypes I'd probably test out is I guess you could call it an A/B test of like, how would this feel as a strictly kind of text-based, imaginative game that's like in a journal or something versus something more tactile. Like for some reason I had this idea of like the first stage is you're actually building a dungeon with like popsicle sticks. You know, like the way, like the way that kids make like little houses and log cabins and stuff like that. Because then if you're showing the passage of time, instead of adding to it, you can take away. You can show decay, you can break things, you know, deface it in some way, or even add things like you know, draw like a tree or something like that, like things growing up through the foundations to show the passage of time. And from there, I would probably then look at those 2 branched ideas, something that's like a little more just pen and paper versus something where like the player would have to gather materials in order to have a different and more invested in terms of like tactile stuff experience.
So that's really interesting. And that's a concept that maybe not a lot of people are familiar with, but you are an expert in. Could you tell us maybe a little bit more about Field Guide to Memory and sort of your keepsake games and how that relates to, this is similar, in a similar vein. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah. Oh, someone just addressed it in the chat. Someone in the chat asked what an A/B test is. For people listening who aren't watching the chat, maybe an A/B test basically means like, I want to see how this does, let's say I'm testing a piece of marketing copy, and I'm like, okay, if I put this marketing copy out on Twitter at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, how does it do if I stick to just like a logistical description of the game versus how does it do if I write something with more like flavor, so to speak? And then kind of watch like how many people retweet it, how many people like it, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm glad that answers your question. So
and that can be applied in all kinds of things. So in marketing, but also in design, like does this design or that design work? Is this fun? Is that fun? Is that, you know, all kinds of things. It's a super useful thing. So to even get your mind thinking that way, like
totally
right. You don't know the answer, right? You can go out and see what works. Like you have some opportunities, but
and to a certain degree, a lot of this is, it's not like an artificial categorization, but it's definitely like when I actually design something, it's very organic and the boundaries aren't this distinct and rigid. I'm just trying to define them more so it's like useful if you're learning it for the first time. But you're asking about Field Guide to Memory and keepsake games, I think.
Yeah.
So Field Guide to Memory is a game that I co-designed with Xingyan Core, who will actually be talking about production and logistics at the 4th in the series, I think.
In 2 weeks, so
yeah. And we made a game called Field Guide to Memory, which was a connected path game about a cryptid researcher who goes missing in the field, and then the player plays their protege trying to figure out how to get a hold of their research. And it was a game where the core experience was played remotely. It involved prompts that were emailed to you every day, and then you would respond to the prompts in a journal. And some of it was very like, this is the prompt, write how you feel about it. But some of it was also like, go outside for a walk and write down all of the plants and animals that you recognize, and then try to describe the ones you don't. Or like look up a park near where your character lives and draw a trail that she remembers hiking with her mentor. What points on the trail did the mentor say something that like really changed her life? And uses journaling as actual artifact creation. So there's no physical game text. The physical game text is the one that the players create as they keep adding to this journal over time. Sometimes they paste in letters, sometimes they draw these maps, sometimes they do like nature sketches of what they see outside. And games that create artifacts over the course of gameplay exist, and games that then show off the process in like a show and tell way exist. But Shing and I couldn't find like a single term that was accessible to lay people, right? Like it's entirely possible there's some academic term for it, but behind like 3 paywalls that I don't have access to. And also nothing that really necessarily reflected like our experiences in diaspora, which absolutely informed a lot of like what we were writing. And so we came up with 2 terms, which are keepsake games, which are games that create an artifact through the course of gameplay, and the creation of that artifact is the gameplay. And then you're left with this like memento at the end. And also connected path games, where the process of gameplay is like a show and tell. There's always an option baked in where there's a whole community of people where even if you're taking place passively, there's a lot of that intuitive sharing that we want to do going on. And both of these acts, like making and then sharing it with others who you care about, are things that kids do. Kids find it really intuitive to just make stuff, and then they want to, you know, show and tell is a thing that teachers do in class because kids really want, excuse me, a chance to be on a stage to offer up what they've made. And yeah, we just those games exist, but we just named them in a way that made sense for us. And yeah,
Great.
yeah, hope that answers your question.
It does, yeah. So Omari, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, the way that Jeeyon describes keepsake games and this concept that we're sort of working with, it feels like it lends well to this process, sort of creating keepsakes that then can in some way kind of be reinvigorated or revitalized in the next phase of the game is something that feels really interesting to me. The concept that I was sort of thinking about in terms of death, and it seems like the first team kind of really emphasized that piece, and immediately made me think of games like Hades, where you die and that has an impact on the story in some way. I think about it in terms of a multiplayer game where you don't want a player who has died not being able to participate. And sort of very quickly when Jeeyon was talking about like the popsicle sticks situation, I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to have if players were sort of building out the dungeons with popsicle sticks, and upon death would just have new ways of interacting with that space. So they're no longer the builders, but they're potentially, maybe they can alter, or maybe they can potentially remove or supplement or change or transform. So they're still interacting with the space, which is still going to leave some sort of impact for the next playthrough, but it's just in a very different way that they're interacting with the game. And theoretically, they would still be playing along with the rest of the group the entire time. I think that would be kind of interesting too to play around with.
Yeah, actually, one of the first thoughts I had too was when we were talking about how death affects both the narrative but the player experience, and how you want people who died, Sarah and Ken's like saying like you want people who've died to not feel like left out, and therefore like they should be participating. I thought immediately of Among Us, which I don't know if you've played.
Mentioned Among Us. Yeah, they talked about Among Us. Yeah.
It's so good.
Do you want to explain that again for?
Oh yeah, Among Us is a online group game, multiplayer. The more chaotic it is, the more fun it is. One of the unique aspects is when you die in it, you're all like little members of a spaceship, and one of you is the imposter, and you're like going around trying to kill the other members of the spaceship. But you also have all these ship tasks. And so the timer is actually all those tasks getting finished. When all the tasks get finished, if the imposter has been caught, before then the ship is safe. If they haven't, then they win. So when you die, you can still do tasks. You can actually help speed that timer along. And the first time I ever played, and this is very typical for me, it takes a few times for a rule to really sink in or a play condition to sink in. I didn't know I died. There was like the little dying sequence, like I got killed. The physical me got turned into like a little ham, which is what happens when you die. And then there was this ghost and I was like, oh, but I'm still playing, because I was so used to this idea of like, if you die, then you're not doing anything. But I could still go around and like fix things and toggle little switches and stuff. So I was still having fun. And then I realized like, oh, I died and I didn't even notice because I was still doing stuff. So Among Us has that aspect of design that I think is like really good. And there are ways to capture it in a more like tabletop way or like indie game way as well. And I think board games are actually really well suited to something like this too, if you're going for tactile stuff. Like, I don't know anything about the logistics of ordering pieces for a board game, because, you know, they all have to be, you know, one of the nice things about writing the weirdo games that I write is that you can say like, go out and find sticks, right? Like you're making a little stick house. I don't have to worry about sourcing a bunch of sticks, but you do, right? Like if you were gonna prototype this, you'd have to like think about like what is easy to manufacture. What could I get put in a box without too much trouble?
Exactly. That's actually, I mean, that's one of the fun parts about this project, actually. I'm trying to turn that part of my brain off. And if it's really hard to manufacture, I'll leave that for the people who have to think about that.
Yeah, right. That's not your job today. That's not your job today. You got to blue sky this.
Exactly. Well, there's another piece that kind of caught my attention. I mean, it's another core thing, but I really, it's one of the harder pieces actually for me to conceptualize is interacting as a player in this space and having like your sort of personality and the decisions that you make affect your next playthrough. And so I was trying to just think about ways that might be possible. And I like the idea, especially they mentioned potentially going away from your previous self. And so I was thinking about some sort of dice system that you may potentially be able to modify dice as you go along. I don't know, with stickers or something. And then your self that comes along after that may be able to take that and either accept or reject what you were given in some way, shape, or form. But that dice is potentially also used for your future decisions. So maybe that could be a mechanism of something that gets created as a part of it, gets modified by players making the choices that they make, and then someone is going to have to deal with that after and make a choice about what to do with that once the next rounds of play starts.
So yeah, dice are an interesting one because that's like dice and stickers, not too much of a huge ask, right? Versus, you know, miniatures.
Yeah, my brain was doing the thing anyway.
Yeah, you did it anyway, but like but it's actually a nice way to sort of mix like having something in a box that's worth selling to someone, right? Like sheets of stickers, different colored dice, but also then, hey, go out and get a bunch of popsicle sticks to build your dungeon, right? You could there could be a middle ground between those two, where you sort of push it on the player to source their own materials for some of it, but then we're going to provide them with, you know, the more mechanical elements, I guess, and those kinds of things.
Man, I just had this wild thought. So you were talking about like what's easy to find, what's easy to access, and like for me, I have no problem going out to my backyard and looking for sticks, or like, you know, to the park or whatever. But like one thing I think a lot about is barriers for entry, and this or hurdles, right? Like the height of a hurdle, because this comes from like my background in youth education and outdoor education, is like, what is a player's like proximal zone of comfort, right? Like if there's someone who is used to like going outside and doing weird shit, totally within their comfort zone. But what if there's someone who has only ever played games that are like tabletop, pen and paper, computer? Like that's actually a really big ask, right? And because it involves like multiple steps, it involves like the going outside, finding the time to go outside, getting all the materials, like and not just finding the time to do these things, but having an undefined amount of time. And as I was thinking about what you were saying about Dyson stickers being pretty easy to get, I was looking around my apartment and there's like a pile of cardboard boxes I have to break down and a bunch of index cards that are very messy on my desk right now. And I was like, oh, like what if, like you could do this variant like with the sticks or the popsicle sticks or whatever, but what if it's actually literally just using stuff you have at home? So like that cardboard delivery box for like that thing you ordered, you haven't broken it down, it's the weekend and like it's going to be a while to recycling, like turn it into the dungeon, right? Like you could do this as solo play or group play, like when you can gather again, everyone could bring their own box. You could have like a really kind of big, like complicated multi-chamber dungeon, and then just office supplies like index cards or whatever where you write down different conditions, right? And so like maybe the first phase is like things are pretty rosy, but half of the things have to be like ways that you can die or like hardships, right? Like you still have to introduce that. You write it on the index card, you like shake it up in a box, and then you pick them out and face down, you put them inside the like dungeon map or whatever. And then as you go around it as players, whenever you cross one, you have to flip it over. And it might be something like there's like a beautiful crown with a, like tiara style like ring of gems just floating in the air around you, like very cool. Or it could be like there's a pit with spikes that you just fell into, like I don't know. And then when you die, you actually get to like change the environment a little bit in the next round. And that way, like you're anticipating something with eagerness, right? There's like death. It's not that you want to die on purpose, but it changes the play sufficiently that there's still a different experience to look forward to.
That plays into something they sort of talked about, this idea of like, when you die, you take some ownership over that death experience and how that changes the dungeon specifically. So that might fit well into this index card idea where you get, maybe whoever's card you die on, you get to reframe it in some way to sort of memorialize your death. And maybe, okay, well, I died in the pit of spikes, but you could walk over my body to go or something, whatever it is, right? That way it feels dark, real terrible.
No, I think that's great, actually.
We have a suggestion.
It's great.
Go ahead, Omari.
No, I was just going to say having the actual way that you die be momentous in some way and connect you to the dungeon in a specific way that allows you to interact with it in a way that's related to that is super fascinating, because that even begs the question of, are players going to in some way identify their ideal way of death in the way that they think that might impact the rest of the game, especially after they've dived once and they've sort of felt that mechanic and they've got a sense of what it can do for them and for the rest of the game. The next time around, they'd be like, ooh, what if I die in this weird way? Like this might be more interesting, which is just a crazy, wonderful thing, I think, for players to experience.
Yeah.
So we've got a comment from Maglin16 in the chat, who says, they say, maybe if it's a game about handing down an artifact to the next character, each player should start by grabbing something like a stick or a leaf or a spoon or a key to represent their artifact, then maybe alter them as the game goes along.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I'm just gonna copy that out of my chat and paste it into this document.
That's a great idea. Maybe like the prep for the game, right, is like as a group you could make that artifact together, whatever it is, and then like as it's added, it's like the people who died who are actually adding to it and altering it. The people who are alive are still role playing and walking through the dungeon, but it's only after death that you get to actually interact with that artifact in like an actual physical way, to create both the division between what it's like to be alive in character versus dead in character, and the different play experiences, and also like kind of the incentive to enjoy being dead as a character. That's very cool.
Do you have something, Omari?
Well, in again, I think coming from a board game place, I'm very quickly trying to identify what is how to get this to that playable place, right?
Yeah.
And in trying to do that, what are some of the systems that are going to interact with each other? We're kind of talking about a few different things, and I'm slowly piecing together what that might actually look like. And the cardboard box thing is brilliant. It's weird how good flattening a cardboard box turns
Oh
into
my
a
God.
dungeon. Like my
Yeah.
brain was like, what? Obviously, that's amazing.
Because like the way that it like kind of there's like
Exactly.
wings. Yeah.
And if you
Yeah.
cut it in different ways, you're going to get different orientations, and like, yeah,
Totally.
it's
Yeah.
lovely. It's lovely. But and then what does that look like? What are some of the sort of parameters that can be applied to modifying that, like in terms of especially like for potentially for dead players, or it could be for everyone, but what does that look like? And again, how to bring it back to that personal choice piece,
Yeah.
because that's a place that I really want the player to feel invested there, because it's their character, their decisions that they're making. And then I have this angel in the back of my mind. So like, what's happening with this angel?
Right.
How do we convince the player that this is a thing worth pursuing, in the context of some of the ideas that we've already described? So I'm not there yet, but that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
What's possible in terms of getting all these systems to interact together?
Yeah.
We talked a little about dice and stickers. So is there some dice mechanic y'all are fans of, and how could that change with changing the dice in some way? You've got dice pools, you've got dice that could represent, your character can be, defined by your dice pools. I'm just trying to name dice systems off the top of my head.
I mean, like, this is the second ever tabletop I played was Apocalypse World, and I think that the Apocalypse World, like on a 7 to 9 like dice rolling system with a single d6 or 2d6s, is like really smart. It can actually scale down also, right, to 1d6. It could just be 1 to 2, 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6.
You missed that nice bell curve though in the middle with the 7
It's
to
true.
9.
Yeah. It does change the probability by quite a lot. But if you wanted to mess with that deliberately, like, that's an option. And I really like how elegant and easy to grasp that is. Like the idea of like a mixed success is kind of intuitive for people to role play. And it can also be what I've noticed, because I've played a lot of the Apocalypse World like engine games at this point. It's one of my favorite to play, is when you get a mixed success and as a player you're stuck for an idea, the table is full of ideas, right? Like they're all about like how to make it kind of gnarly. And it creates a fun kind of like group storytelling vibe sometimes. And there's a tension in this game design that Sarah and Ken came up with of like the individual player experience versus like the group experience, and how you like kind of tie the two together. And then that added element of like what happens when a player dies makes it very, that is like a big variable to add. And so I might add a control to that in some way. So something like, if you're alive in character, you're role playing, you're walking through the dungeon, you're looking for this angel, but you're not altering the space. If you're, save for that first round where you're creating it together. But once you die, you are altering the space, and maybe you can like narrate objective environmental things, like there's a storm outside that's starting to seep in through the walls or something like that. But you're not narrating anything subjective. You're not talking about any feelings. You're not talking about thoughts or memories. Actually, maybe you could like trigger memories. That's like the only thing that you can do if you're dead. That's like subjective at all. But like just something to create a clear division of like how the play will happen, because otherwise I can see that being a big mechanical stumbling block, you know?
Yeah. And something like that, like you want it to be very intuitive. You want the player to be able to connect the idea of death very quickly to whatever that control, whatever that change is. And I think what you described makes a lot of sense. I imagine a ghost, if you're a ghost, we have ghosts in this world. You are able to have an awareness of things that are maybe happening that your players who are, you know, still living and breathing don't have. And that gives you a point of reference that's different, a different perspective. And yeah, being able to communicate some of those things in some way and could be interesting. And it may be able to sort of provide warning by dropping something in the dungeon or leaving something, sort of sending messages to the players who are still alive in some way.
I love that.
And if we're dropping index cards everywhere, it could be a thing where they can replace cards or maybe move them around, or something just to inform what's happening in the game.
We have go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that the chat's on fire right now.
So we've got a couple things from the chat, right? Magdalene again. The box could be torn up and into different empty rooms for the characters to explore. And as they die, they can turn the empty rooms into specific rooms with specific benefits, like a shrine to increase luck or a spring to regain health, right? So that's that idea of the dead people being able to define those sort of empty rooms. That's neat. But the ghost players can't talk, Magdalene just added.
Right? I love that.
Right. So a little bit of
good.
And then Faulkner, I think that's Logan. The angel might be trying to discover the components of humanity by luring people into its home to die so that it can examine their soul, perhaps to get different insights or powers, and depending on which character dies.
Wow.
That's cool. That's like a whole different game.
That is, well, you know,
but I love it. That's so
and
good.
The dead might be able to scout one room in the dungeon and then can warn the living of specific places, right? So they could look at what's under that card, you know.
Wow.
But I like this idea of it sort of goes with what you guys were saying, but this idea of the dead being the ones who get to add to the dungeon in some ways or modify them, and you know, not talking in particular, but you know, there's something cool there, right? It's a little bit of oh gosh, what's that game that I played a million times?
One more logistics piece. Do we, if we're going into this dungeon and attempting to uncover potentially, there's maybe an angel at the end. If we're working from that framework, is it true? And it just hit me. Is it true that the players have to die their first 2 times through?
Well, the original idea was they didn't have to die, but it would be so much longer later that they would be new people. But that we don't have to keep that. That's just sort of because they were doing those huge time loop jumps, that sort of was built in. But if you guys want to moving away towards sort of like re-exploring within one setting multiple times.
Well, I was thinking more of just from a story perspective. I imagine that if you're going through this encounter 3 times, that the angel or whatever remains undiscovered until the end.
Yeah,
which would mean something would have to prevent you from discovering it one way or other. So if that's true, does that mean we have to kill everybody off the first time through and the second time through?
Oh, man.
Just to be able to create that sort of element and create that desire to like move forward through?
Yeah, if you're keeping the part where the angel, like there's like this whole other external environmental thing, but it has motivation and desire versus being kind of like a forest where it doesn't want to mess with you. It's just doing, the ecosystem is doing its thing, right? It's not passive, it's very active, but like the way that you interact with it will determine your success or failure with it, right? But if you're using that thing about the angel is like luring you, immediately with that premise, there is like a whole other set of motivation that is oppositional to the player character's motivations, which is really cool. And it's also a design consideration. Like if that's the case, how do you design for that so that it's rewarding versus like a thing that you're kind of
Right.
remembering and then being like, oh, wait, we have
So
to interact with this.
if the people who survive in the first 2 rounds, we assume they make it to the angel and never come back, and they maybe each get to write or create some aspect of the angel that is a secret from everyone else. And it's only when you've looked at, if you finish it the 3rd time and the angel is revealed, that you sort of integrate what all the different people who made it to the angel might have added to it in some way.
Yeah.
It could also be something, I don't know why I've thought of this, like the Wizard of Oz, where the interaction with the angel is only personal. It really has nothing to do with the group story. It really only has to do with the personal story.
I actually like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that could be interesting. And maybe that is what has a more profound impact on your personal artifact. It's like if you can make it to the angel, it's just a more substantial of a moment and can add something to your personal gameplay. That might not happen for the rest of the group.
I'm a little reminded of, have you guys played Alice is Missing?
Yes.
Right. And that way you record your last voice message at the beginning of the game, and then you do the whole game and then play everybody's voice messages. Right. That's a cool, interesting moment. So we've got some other questions or comments. Living characters draw from a random deck of rooms, and dead characters can alter the deck. Another interesting system approach. They could draw 3 trait cards and choose one to add to its portfolio, right? If we had like a set of things that could define the angel, and then they drew 3 and then picked one. There's just some interesting ideas. So we're 41 minutes into our process here. And I think we've come up with some really cool things, like the box thing is great, and and the ghost ad and the players explore. What would be, if you wanted to like get another level nitty gritty detail system wide, what would be your next step, do you think, thinking wise, in this quick prototyping that we're doing here? You like the Powered by the Apocalypse dice system.
Well, for one clarifying question I'd love to ask now is, are we coming up with one game each, or are Omari and I trying to decide on a single design?
Together. All 8 of you together are doing the one game. So over the course of the thing.
My inclination, which I'm very open to hearing otherwise, because I think actually I'm about to say the opposite of what I was about to say. I think having 2 dice, something really simple like 2 dice, helps with randomization. Rather than it having to all be open choice on the player's part. That's how I work really well, but I have discovered through designing that a lot of people get kind of stuck when the world is their oyster. They're like, oh no, it's too many. It's like being in the cereal aisle and being like, which one do I choose? So dice might help with maybe if there's a range of lists to come up with, different environmental factors, different memory triggers or whatever, and then what you roll will determine what you pick from. But otherwise it's fairly open. Something like that, something where there's narrative prompts and narrative springboards for players to play off of, but it's not a really constrained table where if you roll an 11, you have to do this thing, right? Because it seems like you and I are both really drawn to the the openness of imaginative play.
I'm really interested in dice being something, if it's there, being something that's more helping the player sort of keep track of what has happened. I wasn't thinking of dice as necessarily the mechanism that keeps the game going, but something that they could help them keep track of everything that's happened. So
interesting. Kind of like in The Quiet Year, where the dice kind of tracks time ticking down. Is that what you're thinking of?
More like that. But potentially just adding something like that. That's where the sticker thought came from. It was just like it's just keeping track of, but it will have some impact. Like there might be some moment where you need to roll that dice, even though most of the game you're just like creating it, you're crafting it. But then there's going to be a moment where you have to roll it and it does something, it's meaningful.
Yeah.
But not really driving the dungeon creation or anything like that too specifically, because I do want the players to have that sort of be more open-ended.
So we've got a couple more ideas in here from RJ Schuler. What if the players do preset characteristics or dooms for their ghost selves? They could be the opposite of their characters in their normal self. So that's another interesting idea. We could, if you wanted to sort of have that set up in the beginning, might drive them towards, i.e., if your living character is your collector, your ghost is a hoarder, right? So the ghost represents the opposite of your life.
Yeah. Well, with 15 minutes left on the
Yeah.
clock, I think now for me, like just pretending like, oh, maybe there's a deadline on this. This is the point where in my design process, I'd be starting to think about like, what are the bare, like if I had to like make a packing list, what would I need for my first prototype? So it sounds like we need a box. We need an undetermined amount of dice, and possibly index cards and writing implements and stickers of some kind. And you know, maybe loose paper or whatever. And from there, kind of actually try to like either imagine out, or sometimes if it's like small enough, I actually will assemble the pieces in my apartment and actually try to like play it out like in a speed run form of like, does this even actually work, right? Like I would be inclined, like let's say you and I were like together in a room like trying to figure this out, Omari, like once we had all those materials, it'd be like, cool, let's crush these 2 boxes and then see like, how does this work? Like, how does this actually look? And then like, we need to come up with like a rough draft of the 3 stages of play of those like 3 timelines and kind of decide on one to try first. So like there have been a lot of different premises, right? There's been like, you could choose like fantasy, Victorian, modern archaeology. You could choose just one of those categories. Like for me, I would probably just go with fantasy. You could, so like that would be the first decision to make, maybe.
And there's also the option that we just say, pick 3 time periods, whatever works for you, right? So if someone wants to do 3 fantasy, they want to do 3 fantasy. If you know, if they're Ken Hite and they are deep in all that history, then they'll do I want to do medieval, right? So we could say just pick 3, right? The point is that it's 3 and it can be whatever. I
think out of both consideration for Jason and Banana, and also like if I were writing this as a game text for potentially completely new players, I would do my best to be like, maybe there are options, like here's like 3 different sets of time frames. Like here's fantasy, but like I'm going to describe like maybe one is like lush, everything is growing, it's great. The second one, like there's like war in the background happening and it's not as abundant. And the third one is like everything has been like razed to the ground but is just starting to grow back. Like I would define it that way and then be like, now here's this totally other different set of options, but again just like very loosely defined so that players have like something to springboard off of.
I think that's great.
But and also because like those, they can define how much time has passed, right? I have a really hard time if someone says like 200 years have passed. Maybe historically on a real world timeline I know what that means, but as a player I don't like feel it. Versus like describing things that are like happening in the environment, then you can kind of decide like, am I a totally different person, or is like the first stage me as a child and the second stage is me as an adult and then the third stage is me like as an elder. Like those are choices that potentially a player could make too, which makes dying very different as well. Like if you die and you're all the same person, actually you're not like 3 different people, then it means a lot both to yourself that you've died and the group that you've died because they just lost someone that they know. Instead of it just being like creating 3 sets of characters, which if you have 4 players, that's 12 characters over the course of the game. So like that would be a decision.
Lot of character creation.
That's a lot of character creation. So like maybe like, is that something you might want to try, is like actually you are the same person, but it's over 3 stages of your life. And that way it's just 1 character each, but
But then
Like
how does the death work with that then?
I mean, that's the question, right? That's why
Yeah,
I was like,
right,
do you want
right.
to try it or not? I think like, I mean, if you're going with ghosts, right? Because ghosts have come up multiple times. Like, let's say a player escapes death in their childhood phase, but dies as an adult, then they would be seeing, you know, like they would still get to do all the mechanical things that we talked about, like alter the environment, add obstacles or like warnings. I love that idea you had, Omari, of like dropping things into a room as a character like moves into it as like a warning.
Hmm.
And maybe the the dice could indicate like where they stopped, right? Like if you're aging over the process of the game, then your dice keep moving, like the numbers keep changing. But if you die, then like whatever number it stopped on, that's like where you are for the rest of the game as like a ghost, as a dead player. And what that number corresponds to, I feel like should be mechanical, right? Because right now we're
Yeah.
heading toward a game where the mechanics inspire emotional responses. And I think that that's how it also ties into the board game structure, right? Like, because one thing I've heard consistently about Pandemic, which I think is like what inspired Ken and Sarah a lot, is that people often have like it's not a role-playing game per se, but people have slightly emotional responses to the gameplay as it progresses.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like very loose role playing. And so like that's another decision to make, right? Is they're describing a game that's kind of straddling two areas. They're straddling like the Pandemic legacy style of game where everything's like quite mechanical and logistical and preparatory, but then they're also like, but we want it to be a role-playing game too. And it doesn't have to be oppositional and binary, but it's definitely going to be one is more emphasized than the other. So that's something I'd actually love to leave to you, Omari, like which sector to kind of concentrate on more.
I think I'm certainly leaning towards the role-playing side. I think just the type of game that we're describing has very interesting and unique challenges in the board game space that I think would take away from the player's ability to connect with all of the things that are transpiring a little bit, especially talking about having interactions with the environment, like the type of interactions with the environment that I would like to see, I think are going to be very, very, very difficult in more of a board game style of game.
So
can you explain that a little more? I think that's exactly right, but maybe so in what way would it be difficult for a board game?
I mean, specifically, you have to, and we kind of talked about it already, you have to produce materials that can facilitate all of the interactions with the game that you're describing. And doing that in a lot of ways, it just limits the what the game is capable of. And so, yeah, just to avoid that and leave room for, I think, some more interesting experiences, I would kind of shift away from that and use, you know, these mechanical devices as facilitators more than as the guide through the game.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Jeeyon, do you have does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some good bones. There's plenty for Jason and Banana to winnow out.
Yeah.
But like, and I actually didn't want to get too much into like this is what I'd cut out, because that's sort of what playtesting, like that's what I use playtesting for. And it's been very hard to restrain myself talking too much about playtesting because that's next week. Yeah.
So let's in our time here, just so we make sure we're all in the same. So I have a solid thing to pass on. Do you want to try sort of summing up the things that you think are core to this prototype?
Yeah, I think we can give it a shot.
Yeah, I think so.
I think I lost my camera. Whoops.
Nope.
It's back.
There,
it's just
back.
being.
Yay,
it's just doing what it wants to do. Did you want me to do that, Rick? Try to
either one of you, yeah,
up?
sure. If you feel like you're on it, please do.
You can definitely jump in. I'm gonna forget something. But we're looking at sort of creating a dungeon, or kind of allowing the players to create a dungeon from materials that they bring. We're looking at cardboard boxes, in some way breaking those down so that they create that physical dungeon space and letting players move through them. It sounds like there's going to be index cards that players, I guess, as they go through the dungeon, they'll either draw these cards or maybe even roll dice to determine which cards are being used, and placing them in the dungeon. These cards are describing either what's in the room, dangers, potential benefits, artifacts, those types of things.
So I want to just pause there, because we talked a little bit about the players making the cards, which is one way to go, or is that what we're selling them, is a bunch of these cards?
I guess that's something to play test for.
Okay.
Like, do they like it
yeah.
more if they make it themselves, or do they do better if they have a predetermined set of cards? Like, that would be a good A/B test right there.
Yeah, definitely.
There's maybe even a third, or do we just give them prompts, like a sort of Mad Libs?
To kind of fill in.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a little middle ground.
Yeah.
We talked about if players are dying in this version of the game, that they will be able to interact with the environment in some way, either by placing more index cards or potentially modifying or ripping off parts of the boxes. Changing the environments. And
reiterating, we like the idea that only the people who have died can do that, right?
Only people
I think
who
so.
can do that.
Yeah, they have a different perspective. That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm still not quite sure where the angel and how it's going to interact. We talked about a few things there. So I don't know. Do you want to pick one of those to continue?
I mean, there's so many good ideas in the chat, and I feel like to only pick one would be a crime.
It's hard.
It's very hard. So like the cheating answer is to be like, here's a bunch of different ideas for how they interact with the angel, and that's what we're going to play test for. That's the cheapo we're getting out of this unscathed idea.
Nice.
Yeah. And that's what I got there.
That's what we're going with. All right.
Yeah.
Let me make sure
they're all so good. Yeah, they're all so good. So I don't want to like choose just one over the other.
And we also talked about the sort of apocalypse world dice potential for randomization of potentially some of the things that happen in the game. And I don't know, maybe you can do both, and somehow they're also the keepsake, and they keep track of something or some events that are going on, whether that's death or choices that you make, and may potentially be passed on to the next players or the next characters.
Totally. I love it. I want to play this game.
Yeah, me too.
It sounds so fun.
Great. Well, I think we've definitely done a great job taking the bones that Ken and Sarah buried for us and excavating them and turning them into. We've got some really cool stuff here. I don't know where I thought it was going when we started an hour ago, but I didn't think it was going here. So that's awesome, right? Like, we definitely didn't get anywhere that I imagined.
I feel like that sentence is like, welcome to game design.
Yeah,
right
really. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank you guys very much for spending an hour on your Saturday with us here. And do you have any last quick plugs or anything any shout outs you want to give?
I always forget this one, but I do stream on Twitch weekly.
There you go.
So, I was gonna say, I'm just gonna put a little emoji in the chat for anybody who's watching. And yeah, you can find me. My name is Akilaverse on Twitch. So I do both, where I'm just playing games for fun, and then I also do game design jams, where in 90 minutes I try to come up with games inspired by some other games. So there are a few of those really around there. So yeah, you could check me out on Twitch.
Yeah. And you already know how to use it. We know. All right.
Look at that.
Although this video will be up on YouTube soon too. So if you're watching it in the future, you can go find him. Jeeyon, anything? You got your Patreon you mentioned if you want to.
I'm not sure if I mentioned it. I mentioned the Kickstarter for.
You
The
mentioned
Shape
it
of
as like,
Shadows.
do you make a game for your Patreon versus? For
Oh, I see. Yeah, I
Yeah.
do have a yes, I do have a Patreon, and actually, I don't stream on Twitch because I don't understand how to do that by myself. But I do on my Patreon, on my patron Discord. Just kind of like when my schedule allows it, I'll drop a Zoom link in there and be like, hey, like let's co-work, or let's try like designing a game together is like something I want to try experimenting with later. But also I do what I call craft circles, where I'll take my phone or whatever out to the yard and use the cellular data to like do carving or gardening, or I have to clean a bunch of keys for Gideon Blythe, and I'm actually saving the liquid for like textile dyeing. And so it's a lot of like the outdoor traditional skills that I've learned, because a lot of people in the Discord are also into like various skills and stuff like that. So the thing I want to try in the future is like all of us taking our phones out and kind of doing that together.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's not game design per se, but there's a lot of like fertile ground, and often we end up talking about games in those like little hangouts. So that's a fun time.
So that's the Discord for your Patreon.
For my Patreon, yeah, which
Great.
is just my name.
There you go. Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah.
And join us again next week when Banana Chan and Jason Morningstar take up the mantle of figuring out how to make this actually a game, although it's clearly a very cool one. So thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thanks.